Laudetur Jesus Christus, praised be Jesus Christ. A very warm welcome to you on behalf of Vatican Media, Vatican Radio, and all my colleagues here at the Vatican's Dicastery for Communication. I'm Joseph Tolek.
And I'm Francesca Merlo.
And together we'll be providing you with the English language commentary for this live broadcast of Pope Francis's speech at the G7 summit in Puglia, Italy.
A very warm welcome to all of you, whether you're joining us via our Vatican News YouTube channel, EWTN Television, Catholic Faith Network in America, or Catholic Television. And lastly, this broadcast is also available live right now on our Vatican Media audio app and Vatican News website, which you can access at www.vaticannews.va, as well as from our Facebook page.
And so those of you who are following us via television can see the images here of the preparations for the Pope's address to this G7 summit. The G7 is an informal forum of economically developed countries, and it brings together Italy, Canada, France, Germany, Japan, the United Kingdom, and the United States of America. It hosts an annual summit in a different member state each year, and this year the summit is taking place in Puglia in southern Italy. And again, those of you watching on television can see some of the images of the very beautiful venue here in Puglia. The Pope will be, as I said, addressing the G7. He'll be the first pontiff ever to do so, and he'll be giving a speech on the subject of artificial intelligence. The leaders of each of the G7 nations will be in attendance when the Pope gives his speech. They're just arriving now. Those are the images you can see. And it won't just be the leaders of the G7 nations, it will also be the presidents of the European Council and the European Commission, as well as the leaders of a number of other states who've been invited by Italy to this meeting.
So the Holy Father departed from the Vatican by helicopter at around 11 a.m. local time, and he was welcomed upon arrival by Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, who is currently greeting all the participants arriving at the event. Then a golf car took him to the residential venue, which was chosen to host the summit. And before his speech, he held a series of bilateral meetings with world leaders, and we have actually just received confirmation that those meetings were with Kristalina Georgieva, who is the managing director of the International Monetary Fund. He also met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, with French President Emmanuel Macron, and with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Now, the Pope is scheduled to deliver his speech, was scheduled to deliver his speech at about 2:15 p.m. local time, but that has been moved to about 2:30 and will take place in the Sala Arena. Now, Giorgia Meloni is greeting Milei, the Argentinian Prime Minister. Now, after the Holy Father's speech, which is due in about 15 minutes, and for which we will be providing the English language translation, the Holy Father will himself listen to other interventions, and a group photo will be taken at around 5:30. Now, after this, there will be a second batch of bilateral meetings for the Holy Father, and these should be with Kenya's President, William Samoei Ruto, Narendra Modi, Prime Minister of India, who was only recently re-elected for his third term. Then the Holy Father will meet with US President Joseph Biden, with Luis Inácio Lula da Silva, who is the President of Brazil, with Tayyip Erdogan, who is the President of Turkey, and with Algerian President Abdelmajid Tebboune. And then that will bring an end to this summit, and the Holy Father's helicopter is expected to depart from Puglia at about 7:45 p.m. local time, and the Holy Father is expected to return back to the Vatican at about 9:15.
So this is the second day of the G7, and the leaders have been meeting and discussing since kind of yesterday morning. They've already come out with a number of initiatives, and the most recent one is that they've pledged to step up efforts against global malnutrition. That's according to a draft statement that came out earlier today. It said that Russia's invasion of Ukraine had aggravated the world's already existing food problems. The new initiative is called the G7 Apulia Food Systems Initiative, named after the southern Italian region Puglia that's hosting this summit, and it will aim to overcome structural barriers to food security and nutrition. That's according to the draft that's just been released. The initiative will focus on low-income countries and support projects in Africa, one of the top priorities under Italy's rotating G7 presidency this year. So, as I said before, every member of the G7 takes turns in hosting in being the president and hosting the annual leader summit. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni announced a flagship Italian plan to help Africa earlier this year and has repeatedly said that support for the continent is essential to address the root cause of illegal migration to Europe.
Now, Pope Francis often speaks of artificial intelligence, and most recently he did so on the 12th of May, so just over a month ago, marking World Communications Day, an annual celebration, and the Holy Father annually releases a message for the occasion. And this year, the theme of his message for World Communications Day was artificial intelligence and the wisdom of heart. So, artificial intelligence obviously at the heart of his message. Now, Pope Francis wrote in his message that in a world filled with God's bounty and the constant progress of human inventions, not excluding the reality of the growing disparity between the digital haves and have-nots, artificial intelligence comes as an invaluable tool to enhance our lives and, without doubt, perhaps to also create more inequalities too.
And so for those of you who are just tuning in, we're coming to you live from the G7 Leaders Summit in Puglia, Italy. Pope Francis is going to be delivering a speech in just a few moments. Actually, in about 10 minutes, it's expected he'll start talking. The world leaders who will be listening to the speech are currently arriving. Those of you watching on television can see Antonio Guterres, the head of the UN. He's just one of the world leaders that will be there listening to the Pope. And as I said, in about 10 minutes, we're expecting to hear from the Holy Father. So I said earlier that one of the initiatives that's come out of the G7 so far was a resolution on food security, but that was just one of the things. And so another resolution that was made concerned a commitment to a faster transition from fossil fuels. Leaders of the G7 said that they would commit to accelerating the transition away from fossil fuels during the current decade. That's according to a draft of the statement which will be issued at the end of the summit. And they said, quote, "We will transition away from fossil fuels in energy systems in a just, orderly and equitable manner, accelerating actions in this critical decade to achieve net zero by 2050 in keeping with the best available science." Other commitments on climate policy in the draft include a pledge to phase out existing unabated coal power generation in our energy systems during the first half of the 2030s. And with the COP29 United Nations Climate Conference due to start in November, the leaders of the G7, which, as I said before, include the leaders of the United States, Canada, Japan, Germany, France, Britain and Italy, said that they would submit more ambitious national climate change plans. Again, that's according to the draft. So that document commits to a collective effort to reduce methane emissions by 75% by the end of 2030, so quite an ambitious target. But in a section which some analysts say is likely to upset environmental activists, the leaders give a green light to public investments in natural gas, which is obviously, as we know, a polluting fossil fuel. And the draft also said, quote, "In the exceptional circumstance of accelerating a phase-out of our dependency on Russian energy, publicly supported investments, as the Turkish leader, Erdogan, is now arriving and going to greet Giorgia Meloni. The draft said that publicly supported investments in the gas sector can be appropriate as a temporary response subject to clearly defined national circumstances. And so another resolution that has come out from this G7 summit so far concerns China. G7 leaders are discussing additional steps to level the playing field with China and protect their economic security. That's according to a senior US official. The official said that Washington expected to see unprecedented unity across the G7 in confronting China's non-market policies and practices. And so, as we mentioned before, Pope Francis, before this meeting got started, he had a number of bilateral meetings. They've now been confirmed by the director of the Holy See Press Office to have been with Kristalina Georgieva. She's the Director General of the International Monetary Fund, and with Ukrainian President Zelensky. And then after that, he had some more meetings with the French President Macron and with President Trudeau of Canada. So those were the meetings that he had before, and then afterwards, so first of all, the Pope will give his speech, and then he's going to stay to listen to some other interventions. So his speech is expected to begin in about 5 minutes at 2:30. He'll give that speech, which might last something like half an hour, probably a little bit longer, and he'll then stay, all these times, of course, are Rome time, so he'll then stay until 5:30 p.m. Rome time, listening to what the other world leaders have to say, and then he'll have another batch of bilateral meetings. So those are expected to be, although of course we'll only know after the fact if they're confirmed, they're expected to be with Kenya's President William Ruto, with Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India, with US President Joe Biden, with Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, the President of Brazil, with Erdogan, with Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the President of Turkey, and with the Algerian President Abdelmajid Tebboune. And then afterwards, as Francesca mentioned earlier, the Pope's helicopter is expected to depart at 7:45 p.m. local time and arrive in the Vatican about an hour and a half after that.
Now, as Joe just mentioned, the Holy Father met in bilateral meetings with a number of leaders of different countries, and he also met with the head of the International Monetary Fund. And whilst we know what presidents and prime ministers do, perhaps the International Monetary Fund is maybe not as present. And so just a little bit about that. The International Monetary Fund, commonly known as IMF, works to achieve sustainable growth and prosperity for all of its 190 member countries. Now, according to its website, it does so by supporting economic policies that promote financial stability and monetary cooperation, which are essential to increase productivity, job creation, and economic well-being. The IMF is governed by and accountable to its member countries. The fund, as it is, has three critical missions. These are furthering international monetary cooperation, encouraging the expansion of trade and economic growth, and discouraging policies that would harm prosperity. And to fulfill these three missions, IMF member countries work collaboratively with each other and with other international bodies. So that is one of the people that the Holy Father met with just a few minutes ago.
Yeah, and so one of the really big things that's come out of this G7 summit so far, and again, just to those of you who've just tuned in, since I last said this, we're waiting for the Pope to start addressing the G7 World Leaders Summit. That should be happening very soon. But one of the things that happened yesterday, and one of the really big results that come out of this G7 summit so far, has been that leaders of the G7 member states agreed on an outline deal to provide about 50 billion of loans to Ukraine using interest from Russian sovereign assets frozen after Moscow invaded its neighbour back in 2022. The agreement was the centrepiece of the opening day in southern Italy of the annual summit of G7 leaders, which was attended for a second successive year by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Ukraine, of course, is not a member of the G7, but he's been invited both this year and the previous year to participate. And Zelensky signed a new long-term security accord with US President Joe Biden after signing a 10-year security accord with Japan, with Tokyo promising to provide Kiev with 4.5 billion this year. That's underlining its continued strong backing from the West. Calling the frozen asset agreement a significant outcome, Biden told reporters that it was another reminder to Russian President Vladimir Putin that we're not backing down. Now, Narendra Modi is arriving, one of the last G7 leaders, I think, to arrive here. He's greeting President Meloni, and he'll be headed inside to listen to the Pope's speech, which is starting soon.
So Narendra Modi has only just recently, now in the last general elections, been sworn in again as Prime Minister of India, and he is now running his third term, which is a world record for the country. This is the first time an interim Prime Minister has been in power for so long. Now, this term is likely to be slightly different for him, as he had a bit of a challenging election, and he is now ruling in a coalition government.
Maybe some of you are watching this at home and thinking, what is the Pope doing at this clearly political event? Is that the Pope's job? Should he be meeting with these world leaders? What we can say about that is that actually the popes, at least the recent popes, the last handful, 3 or 4 of them, have really made engagement with international political organizations a very important part of their job, of their role. And so Pope Francis, this is not the first time he's done something like this. He addressed the European Parliament, he's addressed the United Nations. Often, for instance, when he visited the US, he addressed one of the, I can't remember actually if it was the Senate or what, but so he addressed politicians in the US, and so he does it quite a lot. For instance, I'm thinking now as I look at this of his visit to the EU Parliament. That was back in, I believe, 2014. Yeah, it was in 2014, and he said, quote, "In addressing you today, I would like, as a pastor, to offer a message of hope and encouragement to all the citizens of Europe. It is a message of hope," he said, "based on the confidence that our problems can become powerful forces for unity in working to overcome all those fears which Europe, together with the entire world, is presently experiencing. It is a message of hope in the Lord, who turns evil into good and death into life." So the images that have just been cut, but we're expecting, this is probably because the Pope will soon begin his address. We'll see. So we're not entirely sure what's happened. There's been a slight technical problem. We'll just bear with us, and hopefully we'll be back in a moment with the Pope's speech from the G7. So again, apologies for this technical problem. We're not entirely sure what's happening. The Pope should be beginning his address to the G7 pretty soon. If we can bring you images and sound from that, of course, we'll do that as soon as we can. Again, many apologies for this technical problem. Yeah, I guess I'll just continue with what I was saying, which is I was saying that, so you heard there, I was quoting the Pope's words from his address to the EU Parliament, and you can see that it's a way the popes have of engaging with these political forums that's still very, they don't speak like normal politicians, but they speak from a point of view that has something to say to politics and wants to contribute something to the political discourse, but is also very informed by spirituality, by tradition, by the faith. And so this is the spirit with which the Pope, this current Pope and previous popes, have participated in political forums like this. And actually, the Pope he doesn't just talk about spiritual issues, doesn't just talk about theology, he really likes to have a voice on these big political problems of our age. And so now we don't have the images from the G7, but we have these images of St. Peter's Square, and maybe those of you who tune in often to our broadcasts have heard before the speeches that the Pope gives in St. Peter's Square. It's either from the window that those of you watching on TV can see kind of there in the top right when he gives his Sunday Angelus address, or from the altar, kind of the centre of the square there when he's celebrating Mass. And he does talk about political problems. He talks particularly about wars. He calls for an end to wars. And this is something the Pope does a lot. He speaks a lot about the war in Ukraine. He prays for peace. He calls for a ceasefire. He speaks a lot about the Middle East. And again, he's been calling for a ceasefire there for longer than almost any other world leader, for instance, October of last year. And so, this is a Pope who likes to have a voice on these big political issues. And of course, so I said he talks about wars, and he talks about war and calls for ceasefires, but also artificial intelligence is something that's pretty dear to this Pope's heart. He's spoken about it a lot before. He's dedicated some pretty long messages, some pretty extensive texts to it, and he's hosted gatherings in the Vatican concerning AI. He put out a thing called the Rome Call for Artificial Intelligence Ethics, and he got some pretty big names to sign up to that, actually. So the heads of some corporations, just off the top of my head, I know Microsoft signed it. Some other big corporations as well, and it's something the Pope is really trying to have a voice on, and really trying to. What he wants is an ethical framework for AI, and we'll hear some of that in today's speech, I think, if we ever manage to get the images and the sound back. His point is that AI, this kind of technology, is a really wonderful opportunity, and it has a chance to really do some good, but also has a chance to do a lot of bad. And so what we need is some kind of ethical framework within which we develop these technologies. And so that's the Pope's point, and that's what we're expecting him to say to the G7 leaders today. Again, apologies for the lack of images. I don't know if the Pope has already started, but as soon as we can, we'll be providing you with an English translation of what the Pope is saying to those G7 leaders.
Now, speaking of popes and speaking of AI, of course, in recent years, artificial intelligence has developed enormously. It continues to develop at an extremely rapid rate. But looking back some years when it was less prominent, and exactly 50 years ago, future Pope Benedict XVI warned us about the dangers of AI, but maybe we will come back to that later.
Yeah, so again, many apologies for that, for the technical issues we're having here. We're now going to end this live broadcast. We hope to be back very soon with the images of the Pope speaking. We understand that the Pope has actually not started speaking yet, and so we will bring you the images and the sound of the Pope speaking. For now, that's the end of this broadcast. See you very soon. Thank you for tuning in. Laudate Jesus Christus. Praised be Jesus Christ.
una lunga giornata.
Ancora vivi?
Ancora vivi?
Siamo in due.
Tutte e due. Mi fa tanto piacere, un grande regalo questa tua presenza qui, grazie.
Grazie.
Veramente. Sono molto contenta.
Sì.
Sarà una lunga giornata, lei lo sa.
Sì. Vediamo cosa dicono questi.
Abbastanza lunga. Però bella.
Vai. Una bella risata.
Ma io e lei sempre. Io e lei facciamo sempre così. Come state?
Quello.
Vai a portare lo scalino dove arriviamo.
C'è un clima però perfetto, ieri era caldissimo.
Ancora vivi?
Ancora vivi?
Siamo in due.
Tutte e due. Mi fa tanto piacere, un grande regalo questa tua presenza qui, grazie. Veramente. Sono molto contenta.
Sì.
Sarà una lunga giornata, lei lo sa.
Sì. Vediamo cosa dicono questi.
Abbastanza lunga. Però bella.
Vai.
Una bella risata.
Ma io e lei sempre. Io e lei facciamo sempre così. Come state?
Quello.
Vai a portare lo scalino dove arriviamo.
C'è un clima però perfetto, ieri era caldissimo.
Ancora vivi?
Ancora vivi?
Siamo in due.
Tu.
Bentrovati.
Mi fa tanto piacere, un grande regalo questa tua presenza. Grazie.
Grazie.
Veramente. Sono molto contenta.
Sì.
Sarà una lunga giornata, lei lo sa.
Sì. Vediamo cosa dicono questi.
Abbastanza lunga. Però bella.
Una bella risata.
Ma io e lei sempre. Io e lei facciamo sempre così. Come state?
Venga, quello.
Fai portare lo scalino dove arriviamo.
C'è un clima però perfetto. Ieri era
Laudetur Jesus Christus, praised be Jesus Christ. A very warm welcome to you on behalf of Vatican Media, Vatican Radio, and all my colleagues here at the Vatican's Dicastery for Communication. My name is Joseph Tulloch,
And my name is Francesca Merlo.
and together we'll be providing you with the English language commentary for this live broadcast of Pope Francis's speech at the G7 summit.
A very warm welcome to all of you, whether you are joining us via our Vatican News YouTube channel, EWTN Television, Catholic Faith Network in America, or Catholic Television. And this broadcast is also available live right now on our Vatican Media audio app and Vatican News website, which you can access at www.vaticannews.va, as well as on our Facebook page.
So what you're seeing now, for those of you following on television, are images of the Holy Father, Pope Francis, arriving in this room with G7 leaders. So the G7 is a forum of economically developed countries that brings together Italy, Canada, France, Germany, Japan, the United Kingdom, and the United States of America. The Pope is arriving now. He's shaking some hands. He's shaking hands there with the President of France, Emmanuel Macron. And he's going to go around, looks like, and shake everybody's hand, and then he's going to be delivering a speech on artificial intelligence. He's the first ever Pope to address a G7 forum, and this one is being held in Italy, so not too far from where he's based in Rome. It's being held in Puglia, in the south of Italy. And the Pope now, for those of you who are following on radio and so don't have the images, the Pope is making a bit of a tour of the room, shaking hands. He just embraced there Javier Milei, the leader of Argentina, who he met a few months ago in the Vatican. Now he's greeting Joe Biden, the US president, and they're taking a moment to speak, exchange a few words. This is the longest greeting yet, actually, of all the world leaders the Pope is giving to Joe Biden. They're both smiling. The Pope, of course, is in a wheelchair. He's been suffering with some knee problems for a few years now. Now he greets the Turkish president or prime minister, I'm not quite sure. That's Tayyip Erdogan. And again, taking a moment to speak to him. The Pope giving him a thumbs up. And he's about halfway round the table now, greeting still the world leaders gathered here. And then, as I said, he'll be giving a speech on artificial intelligence. Standing behind the Pope is the Italian PM, Giorgia Meloni. She has been in power initially for, I think, about 2 years now, and she's the host of this G7 summit. Pope now greeting Luis Inácio da Silva, that's the head of Portugal, the president of Portugal, and now Canada's PM, Justin Trudeau. I'm not sure actually of the name of this gentleman here, but the Pope still continuing to make this little tour of the room. It's the Sala Arena in this place in Puglia, Italy, that's been chosen as the venue for the G7 summit. A little delay in starting the Pope's speech today. It was scheduled to start at about 2:15 Rome time. It's now coming up for 3 o'clock Rome time. Apologies again to those of you who tuned into our earlier broadcast, which we had to interrupt briefly. The Pope now greeting UK PM Rishi Sunak, who's of course in the middle of an election campaign. The elections held on the 4th of July in the UK. And now greeting Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India, who's just been re-elected. So he's just gone through what Mr. Sunak is currently experiencing. And he won, I believe, a third term, Mr. Modi, but with a much smaller majority than he'd achieved on previous occasions. The Pope has now nearly completed this circuit of the leaders' table here. So you might have noticed, I said at the beginning that the members of the G7 are Italy, Canada, France, Germany, Japan, the United Kingdom, the United States of America. There are a lot more leaders than just the leaders of those countries here. They've, of course, been invited by Mrs. Meloni, who is hosting this summit. And now the Pope has arrived, so he's getting up from his wheelchair, taking a seat, and I think we'll be getting started shortly with the Holy Father's speech on artificial intelligence. It's expected to last round about 30-40 minutes. We'll see exactly. I and my colleague Francesco Moro will be providing you with a simultaneous English language translation. As now the Pope takes a seat, all the other world leaders take a seat. So as we wait to hear from the Holy Father, a reminder that our broadcast will finish after the Pope finishes speaking, but if you want to continue to follow the images without an English translation, you can do that. I think that should be possible through our website, vaticannews.va. The Pope will be staying after he finishes the speech to listen to other interventions. Now, headphones being put on, and I think we're expecting the Pope to start imminently. So again, as I said, artificial intelligence to be the topic of the speech from the Pope. And now, Giorgia Meloni.
And thank you very much for accepting the invitation to participate in the G7 outreach session here in Puglia under Italian presidency. We didn't choose this place by chance. We chose it because Puglia is a southern region of Italy, and because it is a land that has historically represented a bridge between West and East, a place of dialogue in the Middle Sea that through Northern Africa and the Middle East connects the two great maritime spaces of the globe, the Atlantic on one side and the Indo-Pacific on the other. This place and this wide outreach that we wanted to invite are a clear message from the G7 under Italian presidency. We will never accept the narrative that wants the West against the rest. We know we can only deal with the global challenges we are facing if we are able to cooperate with respect and with a peer-to-peer approach. Among the many global challenges that we are called out to face, in this period we decided to dedicate the outreach session to those that we consider very pressing. Artificial intelligence, first of all, with the opportunities it opens up and the risks it hides. The Mediterranean, an area of crisis and a place of dialogue. The African continent, with which we work to build a completely new cooperation as equals, and obviously the need to deal without ideological approaches with climate change, which impact, above all, on the nations of the Global South. We will have two keynote speakers to start our work. His Holiness, Pope Francis, who gave us the great honor to participate in our working session, and will share with us his point of view on artificial intelligence. It is the first time that a pontiff participates in a meeting of the Group of Seven, and this inevitably makes today's appointment a historic moment. So I will never thank you enough for being here, Your Holiness. And then we will have His Excellency Mohamed Ould Ghazouani, President of Mauritania and rotating chair of the African Union, who will bring the point of view of African nations on the expectations of the continent. I stop here. Thank you again, Your Holiness. The floor is yours.
And Pope Francis now will be beginning his speech.
Grazie tante per la vostra attenzione.
Thank you all for your attention.
Io qui ho due versioni,
I have two versions here. The long one
e quella breve.
and the short one.
Io leggerò la breve.
I'm going to read the short one.
Soltanto. L'intelligenza artificiale
Artificial
è uno
intelligence
strumento affascinante.
is a fascinating and fearsome tool.
Saluto tutti voi, leader del forum intergovernativo.
Hello to all of you, leaders of the Intergovernmental Forum of the G7.
L'onorevole Giorgia Meloni.
Hello to the Honourable Giorgia Meloni.
Saluto la segretaria dell'Unione Europea.
Hello to the Secretary of the European Union.
Re, tutti quelli che stanno
Hello
presenti.
to the President, to the King, and to all of those who are present.
La riflessione è gli effetti dell'intelligenza artificiale sul
The
futuro
reflection
dell'umanità.
is the effects of artificial
La Sacra
intelligence
Scrittura
on the
attesta
future
che
of
Dio ha donato
humanity.
agli uomini il suo spirito
Sacred
affinché-
scripture attests
affinché
that God
abbiano
bestowed
saggezza,
His Spirit upon human
intelligenza
beings so
e
that they might
scienza,
have skill and understanding
genere di
and
lavoro.
knowledge in every
La
craft.
scienza e la tecnologia sono dunque prodotti
Science and
straordinari
technology are
del
therefore brilliant
potenziale
products of the
creativo
creative potential
di noi
of
esseri
human
umani.
beings.
Ebbene, è proprio dall'utilizzo di questo potenziale creativo
Indeed,
che Dio
artificial
ci ha
intelligence
donato
arises
che viene
precisely
alla
from the
luce
use of this God-given
l'intelligenza
creative
artificiale.
potential.
Quest'ultima, come è noto, è uno strumento estremamente potente, impiegato in tantissime
As we
aree
know,
dell'agire
artificial
umano,
intelligence is an
dalla
extremely
medicina
powerful
al
tool
mondo del
employed in
lavoro,
many kinds of
dalla
human
cultura
activity,
all'ambito
from
della
medicine to
comunicazione,
the world of work,
dall'educazione
from
alla
culture to the
politica.
field of communications,
Ed è
and
ora
from
lecito
education to
ipotizzare
politics.
che il suo uso
It is now
influenzerà
safe to
sempre di
assume
più
that its
il
use will
nostro modo di
increasingly
vivere,
influence the
le
way we
nostre
live, our
relazioni
social
sociali
relationships,
e nel
and
futuro
even the way we
persino la
conceive
maniera
of our
in cui
identity as human
concepiamo la nostra
beings.
identità di esseri umani. Il tema dell'intelligenza artificiale è tuttavia
The question of
spesso
artificial
percepito
intelligence,
come
however,
ambivalente.
is often
Da un
perceived
lato
as ambiguous.
entusiasma per le possibilità che
On the
offre,
one hand, it
dall'altro
generates
genera
excitement
timore
for the
per le
possibilities it offers,
conseguenze che lascia presagire.
while on the other it gives rise to
Non
fear for the
possiamo, del
consequences it
resto,
foreshadows.
evitare che l'avvento dell'intelligenza
In this regard, we
artificiale
could say that all of
rappresenti
us, albeit to
una
varying
vera e
degrees,
propria
experience two
rivoluzione
emotions.
cognitivo-industriale che
We are
contribuirà
enthusiastic when we
alla
imagine the
creazione
advances
di un
that
nuovo
can
sistema
result
sociale
from artificial intelligence,
caratterizzato da
but at the
complesse
same time,
trasformazioni
we are
epocali.
fearful when we
Ad
acknowledge the
esempio,
dangers inherent in
l'intelligenza
its use.
artificiale potrebbe permettere
After all,
una
we cannot doubt that the
democratizzazione
advent of
dell'accesso al
artificial
sapere,
intelligence represents
il
a true
progresso
cognitive
esponenziale
industrial
della ricerca
revolution,
scientifica,
which will
la
contribute to the
possibilità
creation of a new social system
di
characterized by
delegare
complex,
alle
epochal
macchine i
transformations.
lavori usuranti,
For example, artificial
ma al
intelligence
tempo
could
stesso
enable a democratization of
essa
access to
potrebbe
knowledge, the
portare
exponential
con sé
advancement of
una
scientific
più grande
research, and the
ingiustizia
possibility of giving
tra
demanding and
nazioni
arduous work to
avanzate e
machines.
nazioni in via di
Yet at the same
sviluppo,
time,
tra
it could
ceti
bring with it
sociali
a
dominanti
greater
e
injustice
ceti
between
sociali
advanced and
oppressi,
developing nations,
mettendo così
or
in
between
pericolo
dominant and
la
oppressed social
possibilità
classes,
di una
raising the
cultura
dangerous possibility
dell'incontro
that a
a
throwaway
vantaggio
culture
di
be
una
preferred
cultura dello Stato.
to a culture of
Questo è
encounter.
la portata di queste complesse
The significance
trasformazioni
of these
è
complex
ovviamente
transformations
legata al
is
rapido
clearly linked
sviluppo
to the rapid
tecnologico
technological development
dell'intelligenza
of artificial
artificiale
intelligence itself. It is precisely this powerful technological progress that makes artificial intelligence at the same time an exciting and fearsome tool, and demands a reflection that is up to the challenge it presents. In this regard, perhaps we could start from the observation that artificial intelligence is, above all else, a tool. And it goes without saying that the benefits or harm it will bring will depend on its use. This is surely the case, for it has been this way with every tool fashioned by human beings since the dawn of time. Our capacity to fashion tools in a quantity and a complexity that is unparalleled among living beings speaks of a techno-human condition. Human beings have always maintained a relationship with the environment that is mediated by the tools they gradually produced. It is not possible to separate the history of men and women and of civilization from the history of these tools. Some have wanted to read into this a kind of shortcoming, a deficit with human beings, as if, because of this deficiency, they were forced to create technology. A careful and objective view, however, shows us the opposite. We experience a state of outwardness with respect to our biological being. We are beings inclined toward what lies outside of us. Indeed, we are radically open to the beyond. Our openness to others and to God originates from this reality, as does the creative potential of our intelligence with regard to culture and beauty. Ultimately, our technical capacity also stems from this fact. Technology, then, is a sign of our orientation towards the future. The use of our tools, however, is not always directed solely to the good. Even if human beings within themselves feel a call to the beyond, and to knowledge as an instrument of good for the service of our brothers and sisters and our common home, this does not always happen. Due to its radical freedom, humanity has not infrequently corrupted the purposes of its being, turning itself into an enemy of itself and of the planet. The same fate may befall technological tools. Only if their true purpose of serving humanity is ensured will such tools reveal not only the unique grandeur and dignity of men and women, but also the command they have received to till and keep. That's a quote from Genesis. To till and keep the planet and all its inhabitants. To speak of technology is to speak of what it means to be human, and thus of our singular status as beings who possess both freedom and responsibility. This means speaking about ethics. You can't separate the two things. In fact,
artificial intelligence, however, is a still more complex tool. I would almost say that we are dealing with a tool sui generis. While the use of a simple tool like a knife is under the control of the person who uses it, and its use for the good depends only on that person, artificial intelligence, on the other hand, can autonomously adapt to the task assigned to it, and if designed this way can make choices independent of the person in order to achieve the intended goal. It should always be remembered that the machine can, in some ways, and by these new methods, produce algorithmic choices. The machine makes a technical choice among several possibilities based either on well-defined criteria or on statistical inferences. Human beings, however, not only choose, but in their hearts are capable of deciding. A decision is what we might call a more strategic element of a choice and demands a practical evaluation. At times, frequently, amid the difficult task of governing, we are called upon to make decisions that have consequences for many people. We would condemn humanity to a future without hope if we took away people's ability to make decisions about themselves and their lives by dooming them to depend on the choices of machines. We need to ensure and safeguard a space for proper human control over the choices made by artificial intelligence programs. Human dignity itself depends on it. Precisely in this regard, allow me to insist. In light of the tragedy that is armed conflict, it is urgent to reconsider the development and use of devices like the so-called lethal autonomous weapons, and ultimately ban their use. This starts from an effective and concrete commitment to introduce ever greater and proper human control. No machine should ever choose to take the life of a human being.
Rimettere al centro la dignità della persona in vista di una proposta etica condivisa. A quanto ho già detto, va ora aggiunta un'osservazione più generale.
A more general observation should now be added to what we have already said. The season of technological innovation in which we are currently living is accompanied by a particular and unprecedented social situation in which it is increasingly difficult to find agreement on the major issues concerning social life, even in communities characterized by a social cultural continuity. Heated debates and arguments often arise, making it difficult to produce shared reflections on political solutions aiming at seeking what is good and just.
Del valore della dignità della persona umana rischia di essere il più grande vulnus nell'implementazione e nello sviluppo di questi sistemi. Non dobbiamo dimenticare infatti che nessuna innovazione è neutrale. Nessuna innovazione è neutrale. La tecnologia nasce.
Indeed, we must remember that no innovation is neutral. Technology is born for a purpose and, in its impact on human society, always represents a form of order in social relations and an arrangement of power, thus enabling certain people to perform specific actions while preventing others from performing different ones. In a more or less explicit way, this constitutive power dimension of technology always includes the worldview of those who invented and developed it. This likewise applies to artificial intelligence programs. In order for them to be instruments for building up the good and a better tomorrow, they must always be aimed at the good of every human being. They must have an ethical inspiration. Moreover, an ethical decision is the one that takes into account not only an action's outcomes but also the values at stake and the duties that derive from those values. This is why I welcomed both the 2020 signing in Rome of the Rome Call for AI Ethics and its support for that type of ethical moderation of algorithms and artificial intelligence programs that I call alga ethics. In a pluralistic and global context, where we see different sensitivities and multiple hierarchies in the scale of values, it might seem difficult to find a single hierarchy of values, yet in ethical analysis we can also make use of other types of tools. If we struggle to define a single set of global values, we can, however, find shared principles with which to address and resolve dilemmas or conflicts regarding how to live.
E per ultimo la politica di cui c'è bisogno, perché c'è bisogno di una politica su questo.
And finally, the politics that is needed. We cannot conceal the concrete risk inherent in its fundamental design that artificial intelligence might limit our worldview to realities expressible in numbers and enclosed in predetermined categories, thereby excluding the contribution of other forms of truth and imposing uniform anthropological, socio-economic and cultural models. The technological paradigm embodied in artificial intelligence runs the risk then of becoming a far more dangerous paradigm, which I have already identified as the technocratic paradigm. This is precisely where your action, political action, is urgently needed. Just as the encyclical Fratelli Tutti, Brothers All, reminds us. It reminds us that for many people today, politics is a distasteful word, often due to the mistakes, corruption, and inefficiency of some politicians. There are also attempts to discredit politics, to replace it with economics, or to twist it to one ideology or another. But can our world function without politics? Can there be an effective process of growth towards universal fraternity and social peace without a sound political life? Our answer to these last questions is no. Politics is necessary. I think about what a pope once said about politics. It is the highest form of charity. It is the highest form of love. Politics is necessary. And I want to reiterate in this moment that in the face of many petty forms of politics focused on immediate interests, true statecraft is manifest when, in difficult times, we uphold high principles and we think of the long-term common good. Political powers do not find it easy to assume this duty in the work of nation building, and much less so in forging a common project for the human family. There is always the temptation of putting everything together, and what comes to mind is a famous novel from the start of the 1900s, an English book, futuristic novel that shows the future, a future without politics, a very uniform future. It's an interesting book, we should read it. Esteemed ladies and gentlemen, my reflection on the effects of artificial intelligence on humanity leads us to consider the importance of healthy politics, so that we can look to our future with hope and confidence. I have said previously that global society is suffering from grave structural deficiencies that cannot be resolved by piecemeal solutions or quick fixes. We've got to go to the roots. Much needs to change through fundamental reform and major renewal. Only a healthy politics, involving the most diverse sectors and skills, is capable of overseeing this process. An economy that is an integral part of a political, social, cultural and popular program directed to the common good could pave the way for different possibilities which do not involve stifling human creativity and its ideals of progress, but rather directing directing that energy along new channels.
Questo è proprio il caso dell'intelligenza artificiale.
This is precisely the situation with artificial intelligence.
Farne buon uso.
It is up to everyone to make good use of it, but the onus is on politics to create the conditions for such good use to be possible and fruitful. Thank you. And with that, the Holy Father's discourse at the G7 summit has finished.
Holiness, thank you very much for accepting our invitation, says Giorgia Meloni. Thank you. This is the first time that a pontiff has been to the G7, and your words are really an inspiration for all of us. Thank you. And also thank you for saying that you would stay now afterwards to listen to the other leaders' speeches, because we know that you have lots of things to do, so thank you for that. And so thank you. And now
we ask the press to go out.
Meloni switches to English.
The session.
And so that was the end of the Holy Father's address there to the G7. Again, the images have disappeared, but you heard there the Pope's speech, his address to the G7. It was, as Mrs. Meloni said there, the first time that the Pope has addressed the G7 summit, and he spoke about artificial intelligence. He said lots of interesting things.
If you want to listen back to this event at any time, you can find it on our Vatican News YouTube channel and on our Vatican News website, where you can also find summaries of everything the Pope has been up to recently, and that is all accessible at www.vaticannews.va. But of course, please do also take a look at our Facebook, X and Instagram pages. Just search Vatican News on the social media of your choice. And thank you very much. My name is Francesca
Sala
Merlo.
Arena, and I'm in this place in Puglia, Italy, that's been chosen as the venue for the G7 summit. A little delay in starting the Pope's speech today. It was scheduled to start at about 2:15 Rome time. It's now coming up for 3 o'clock Rome time. Apologies again to those of you who tuned into our earlier broadcast, which we had to interrupt briefly. The Pope now greeting UK PM Rishi Sunak, who's of course in the middle of an election campaign. The elections held on the 4th of July in the UK. And now greeting Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India, who's just been re-elected. So he's just gone through what Mr. Sunak is currently experiencing. And he won, I believe, a third term, Mr. Modi. But with a...
Siamo in due. Mi fa tanto piacere, un grande regalo questa tua presenza qui. Grazie, veramente. Sono molto contenta. Sarà una lunga giornata, lei lo sa. Sì, vediamo. Abbastanza lunga. Però bella. Vai.
The room, it's the Sala Arena in this place in Puglia, Italy, that's been chosen as the venue for the G7 summit. A little delay in starting the Pope's speech today. It was scheduled to start at about 2:15 Rome time. It's now coming up for 3 o'clock Rome time. Apologies again to those of you who tuned into our earlier broadcast, which we had to interrupt briefly. The Pope now greeting UK PM Rishi Sunak, who's of course in the middle of an election campaign. The elections held on the 4th of July in the UK. And now greeting Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India, who's just been re-elected. So he's just gone through what Mr. Sunak is currently experiencing. And he won, I believe, a third term, Mr. Modi. But with a much smaller majority than he'd achieved on previous occasions. The Pope has now nearly completed this circuit of the leaders' table here. So you might have noticed, I said at the beginning that the room, it's the Sala Arena in this place in Puglia, Italy, that's been chosen as the venue for the G7 summit. A little delay in starting the Pope's speech today. It was scheduled to start at about 2:15 Rome time. It's now coming up for 3 o'clock Rome time. Apologies again to those of you who tuned into our earlier broadcast, which we had to interrupt briefly. The Pope now greeting UK PM Rishi Sunak, who's of course in the middle of an election campaign. The elections held on the 4th of July in the UK. And now greeting Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India, who's just been re-elected, so he's just gone through what Mr. Sunak is currently experiencing, and he won, I believe, a third term, Mr. Modi, but with a much smaller majority than he'd achieved on previous occasions. The Pope has now nearly completed this circuit of the leaders' table here, so you might have noticed, I said at the beginning, the room, it's the Sala Arena in this place in Puglia, Italy, that's been chosen as the venue for the G7 summit. A little delay in starting the Pope's speech today. It was scheduled to start at about 2:15 Rome time. It's now coming up for 3 o'clock Rome time. Apologies again to those of you who tuned into our earlier broadcast, which we had to interrupt briefly. The Pope now greeting UK PM Rishi Sunak, who's of course in the middle of an election campaign. The elections held on the 4th of July in the UK. And now greeting Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India, who's just been re-elected, so he's just gone through what Mr. Sunak is currently experiencing, and he won, I believe, a third term, Mr. Modi, but with a much smaller majority than he'd achieved on previous occasions. The Pope has now nearly completed this